This exercise proposes to study three different patterns of mixed cost. A mixed cost is a cost which is partly fixed and partly variable. There were three different curves which were proposed, and you had to match them with three different descriptions of let's imagine that we consider personal expenses that you incur in your life, and we will use some examples based on the daily life, and because that makes it easier to really grab the concepts. So let's have a look at the curve number one. The curve number one is starts with a plateau. It's flat, and then once you have reached a certain threshold of activity, because the cost driver is the level of activity which drives the total amount of cost. So once you have reached a certain level, then the cost becomes variable. So the first part of the cost is fixed, and then it becomes variable. A good example of this could be a telecom package that you buy, for which you have a certain amount of traffic which is included in the package. A certain amount of voice traffic, of data traffic and SMS, and then once you have trespassed that threshold, then you have to pay additional amounts which vary according to the consumption you make. Then let's have a look at the number two pattern. The number two pattern shows that even when there is no activity, there is a fixed cost. And then afterwards, for when the activity increases, the cost becomes variable. So it suggests that you have a kind of subscription fee that you pay in order to access the service. And then once you have paid, you will pay for each unit that you consume on a variable basis. So a good example of that would be, for instance, in France, the electricity bill, which is based on a fixed subscription per month, and then you pay a variable amount according to the kilowatts you consume. Then the third pattern is the opposite of the pattern number one. It starts being variable, which means for each unit that you buy, you pay a certain amount, and then there is a threshold, which is here, and once you have reached that threshold, you won't pay anymore. So this is what you would call a capped pricing that is offered to you, and that becomes a fixed cost for you once you have reached that level. So it's also called, capped pricing, as I said. And a good example of that, you will find it in England, in London. If you travel with a transportation network, then at first the cost is variable, and for each ride, depending also of the length of the ride, you're going to pay a certain amount. But then once you have reached a certain amount, you won't pay anymore, even if you travel more. So this is the kind of offer which is part of what is called the Oyster Pass. And it's very different from what we pay, for instance, in France, in Paris, where I live, because in France it's a fixed amount that you pay, and that encourages people to travel a lot and not restrain themselves. On the contrary, in London, you know that if you walk, for instance, instead of taking the subway, then you can save as long as you're below that capped pricing that we were talking about.